Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Johnson, and with me is Evelyn Modal. We are your co-hosts for the Interplay Podcast, a place where we ask and answer questions about everything non-speaking. If you're an individual who is non-speaking or unreliably speaking, or know someone who is, this podcast is for you. Come join us as we chat about the things that we have learned from the true experts, the autistics themselves, and listen in when we interview parents, researchers, and more.
Hey everybody, good to see you, and welcome to our third episode of Shifting the Paradigm. Today we are going to share a couple of responses by some very well-known spellers in the spelling community. We are going to hear the responses to our question, which we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, which was explain something that your friends and or your family see you doing that is misinterpreted or misunderstood. We've been getting some fantastic responses from spellers all over, and we have been honored to get a response from Kedar and Niko, Boskovic. So we will start off with listening to what Ido has to say. Most of you guys hear the name Kedar, and of course, I'm sure it brings to mind a lot of memories because many of you guys, I'm sure, have read at least his first book, Ido and Autism Land, if not his novel that just came out in the past year, which was In Two Worlds, which is a fictional novel looking at autism from the inside out. And Ido and Autism Land, as you guys probably remember, is his memoir that he wrote as a teenager. That novel is one in which when we have new families come into the clinic, that's the first novel that we say, please read this. And it is amazing. It's something that shifted both of our perspectives on autism, and families come back and just blown away. So thank you, Ido. It is a game changer. So I'll start off with Ido's response. He says, "No one in my family misunderstands me anymore. Communication is a wonderful thing. I was misunderstood during my early speech therapy ABA failed years. The professionals understood nothing about me, but they sure filled my days with flashcards. The assertion I want to make that is incorrect is that incorrect theories have led to not very productive therapies. I am aware that many people with autism do silly appearing actions. They stim. They have impulsive movements. They look at old kiddie programs. Yet, maybe the cause is not low cognition, infantile thinking, or low comprehension. Though it may resemble that, it is not that. Your runny nose looks like a head cold, but it's not. You're standing outside in freezing weather and your sinuses let loose. Your fatigue on an easy walk looks like out-of-shape conditioning, but you're fit and you're actually catching a flu. Because non-speaking people with autism don't speak, and worse, can't handwrite, gesture, or communicate in other ways, they have been judged unfairly based on their external movements and by their trapped bodies. Moreover, they are judged by theories. Not being able to speak is perhaps the greatest trap a person can have, but in autism, it is never standalone. The person has compromised motor issues, not just in tongue, jaw, and mouth, but in every way, in every muscle group, in initiation, in escaping perseveration traps, in the ability to do normal tasks. It makes a mother miss her own kid's intelligence. It makes a teacher underestimate her entire room of students. Hopelessness follows. Low expectations bring low results. In truth, if you wonder, starts with imagining autism in a new way, the way autistic people describe it, not the way non-autistic specialists do. We all insist that our disability is not low understanding, but rather an intact mind that is unable to communicate its wishes to the motor system effectively. This is the way I demand people try to understand motor autism. It likely deserves its own diagnosis because unlike the current DSM criteria, I have no difficulty with social insight. I have difficulty controlling my motor system. If more professionals understood this simple paradigm, communication could be taught early, motor skills building fitness could be taught early, and lots of autistic people and their families would be happier. I have tried to combat misunderstandings about autism through my essays on my blog, www.itoinautismland.com. The posts Motor Difficulties in Severe Autism and the Autism Experience Challenge both help understand the inner experience of autism. Both my books, my memoir, Ito in Autism Land, written in my early teen years, and my novel, In Two Worlds, published in 2018, give insights that help break incorrect ideas. Good luck on your learning journey, and let your guide into understanding autism be autistic this time. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I thank you so much, Ito, for taking the time to respond to our question. I have to say, and I'll let you speak, Dana, too, because there's so many things that we can talk about, but the first thing that jumped out at me was really in the very first section, Ito, when you talked about that you are no longer misunderstood. But you obviously had years and years of being misunderstood. But to me, that was the most beautiful thing that I heard, is that because of communication and having the supports that you have, you're no longer misunderstood. Your actions are no longer questioned because you have access to communication, and it's a right. It's not a privilege, it's a right, and it's something that we all should have. So to me, I was like, oh, that was beautiful. And then of course you went into, describing so much that we can pick apart and talk about, but that to me felt so good.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think for me, it was more the thinking back to my early OT days of how we were taught how to view someone with autism. And I think just because he talks so much about therapies that he had early on, and I can't help to think back to those things. And he said, sure, my days were filled with lots of flashcards. And not that I personally did flashcards, but my own thinking and perception of non-speaking people was that they were intellectually delayed. And that was just what I was taught. Although I will remember things where I was like questioning that, which now I look back to and go, yeah, I should have kept going with that thought. But I think that he highlights that so well, and how what we see on the outside, and gives those examples of a runny nose or, looking out of breath, but you're fit, that we just so quickly, not even as professionals or therapists, but as just the society as a whole, look at what is on the outside must be reflective of what's happening on the inside. And I think across the board, all of our non-speakers that have talked with us as far as being misunderstood in some way has brought that up, that what's going on the outside is not reflective of what's on the inside. And I think, you do such a fabulous job of describing that and giving those illustrations. So that for me, it kind of takes me back to those days when I was thinking differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the fact that, he addressed stimming. So do you want to explain to our audience a little bit about stimming? He does a little bit, but if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, and stimming in the autism world is part of kind of the diagnosis when you're looking at an individual that is, or typically it's a young person, when they go in for a diagnosis, it's often a question of do they do something repetitively over and over again? And it can be, seen with the body where they're stimming or they're using objects. But what we know as far as stimming isn't negative. It is a way in which they are self-regulating, and that is coming directly from them and what they're doing. And that's, I think, that the biggest thing that we need to consider is this is what they're saying, and that's the most important thing. Whereas professionals, myself included, when we were taught about autism, is that that is not socially acceptable. So stimming is actually a negative thing in the more medical based autism world. Whereas for our guys and how we work is that stimming is something that is needed to decompress, to help get through certain environments where they're overwhelming in terms of their sensory systems. So I'm not going to give a scientific definition of stimming, but essentially describing it in that way, where for me it was like a past definition and understanding, and now I have a current definition and understanding from autistic people themselves.
Yeah, I know. And I think stimming is, it's so fascinating because I too was taught that it was a behavior that, always should be reduced. And, let's get rid of this stimming, whether it's, I know Ito talks a lot about, hand flapping but there's so many things really that stimming could be. And, it makes me think of how, like, yes, it's a regulatory action, right? And then also when he talks about, when you talk about in your book, how, that inner world of autism can become just so stimulating and kind of suck you in, really. And then I remember, I'm sure it's not the exact words, but it really became lonely because, you were in this world and others weren't there. And so in a sense, stimming was necessary and is necessary, but also I know that I work with some spellers who they say, yes, the stimming, this, whatever it is, X and Y, it's really important that I have the ability to do this, but I don't necessarily want to do it as much as I'm doing it right now, whatever it might be. Some of them talk about the kiddie programs that they, on their iPad and stuff like that. And they're like, yes, I do need it at times, but I definitely don't need it as much. And so then they're saying, can you help me, figure out how to reduce the amount of time I'm spending on it? And so it's very interesting because, and it's like anything, you look at neurotypicals. Well, we can all fall into that habit, like, oh, I'm going to just look at Facebook for, 5 minutes and kind of zone out. Next thing you know, it's 30 minutes. And I'm like, what just happened? And it just becomes, I'm like sucked into that world and whatever. But yeah, I think it's important to understand like the purpose of it. And then be able to, then of course, when they say, yeah, I do need it, but not this much, and be able to support, the individual through it.
Yes, definitely.
Let's see. What else I thought was really awesome, Ito? And I just think what hit home for me in a couple of areas. I'm a mother. I've got 2 kids, 11 and 13. They're neurotypical, but there's still a lot of similarities between neurotypicals and neurodiverse individuals. But when you talked about it makes a mother miss her own kid's intelligence, to me, I was like, oh, like next to the heart, like, God, that just hurts to hear that, and I have a background in teaching, and I taught for 14 years in elementary school, and you talked about, hopelessness follows and low expectations bring low results. And, it made me think about, there was several famous studies that were done where they conducted these experiments, and they told teachers, there was one I remember very clearly. They told teachers, this year we are giving you the brightest students. We have handpicked your students. They are the brightest. They've scored the highest. They have the best reading skills. I mean, they have the most supportive home life. I mean, painted this picture of just like the perfect students. And what was in fact happening was it was just a random group of kids. It was nothing like, there were some that were really bright, let's say. There were some that were struggling with reading. There were some that had excellent supportive home lives, some that, didn't have any parents at home. And so it was absolutely the typical classroom of diversity. But the teachers were told that these kids were handpicked. And they had a control group. It was very well done. And it turned out they followed this class or these classes for a year. And it turned out that those students met and exceeded all of the expectations of their teachers. And because the teachers expected it, they expected them to do well. They expected them to achieve and to make the mark and to do it. And they did. And it's, just like, and the opposite, what you say, low expectations, low results, high expectations, high results. And it's so important. And when we're thinking about that in terms of just humanity, but whether we're, working on communication as a goal or motor skills or whatever, to look at that person and it really goes hand in hand with presuming competence, presuming like, yes, you have this, this, I know you know this, and we're going to work together to get there. I see it all the time.
Yeah, no, and I think too, when I'm speaking with families and talking to parents, because they see, their abilities when they're communicating or working in a fitness session with me, or a purposeful motor, and as I'm coaching through whatever that activity is, and talking to parents about the importance of high expectations. And I think it absolutely goes back to the presuming competence piece, like you said, because when we understand that they understand and know that they understand, we then do tend to, and this is just in our typical world, then we would. But if we go into something like you said, where these teachers were told X, but this, it was just the average. It's almost like teachers go into classrooms, or teachers work, or therapists work with students, and their expectations are already at a lower level than where we should when we presume competence, regardless if they can demonstrate it or not. And I think that is kind of where we get caught up as professionals anyways, and then parents too, because that's what they've been told by the quote professionals, that this is the case. And so you should only expect them to be functioning at a 3-year-old level. And so that's what parents are going to do. And so I think that it's interesting when I'm either interacting or working with other families where the parents are like, I don't care, he can do it. Nope, he's going to do it. And you see the difference, even if the parents aren't necessarily stating that they're presuming competence, but their expectations are high. They're like, I don't care. They're still going to do it independently. And then, some of it's like, well, okay, let's rein that in a little bit because we want to make sure we're supporting them. But at the same time, you see the difference in the child's abilities because they have the expectations and those kids are going to meet them. And we see it at our school too, where it's something that teachers expect this, and so they have that balance of expectation and support. And so when you have that, because we know that it's a motor thing and not a cognitive thing, they are able to then meet those expectations. So yes, I think Ito describes it beautifully with that, because it is, when you read that about how a mother misses her own kid's intelligence and teacher underestimates the entire room of students, and I'm just, I'm thinking it's horrible. And so part of obviously what we want to do with this podcast and what we do in general is to educate people and to say, no, let's look at this in a different way, so that these guys they'll rise to that expectation every single time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I did want to ask you, Dana. So Ito talks about, he talks about having difficulty controlling the motor system, and how that is really his form of autism. And autism, there's a big umbrella, big spectrum, right, of in autism. But he felt for him specifically, and for people like him, it's a motor issue. And he said that if more professionals understood this paradigm, then communication could be taught early. He said motor skills, building fitness could be taught early, and then really lots of autistic people and their families would be a lot happier. And so I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that, Dana, like in terms of, early, like what is, like you can start with whichever one you want, but what age would you think we should start at, and what kinds of things would we start, early on?
So really when I have a little person come in, or I get a call where we've just been diagnosed and it's early, so it's 2.5 or 3, I'm still thinking motor no matter what, just because, that's where I know that that disconnect is happening. And so for that age, I will focus on just motor through play, motor through, activities that are like gross motor focused, and really get a handle on that and tell parents, go to the playground, work on climbing up the ladders, working on manipulating your body through different things. Because these guys, sometimes it is where it's just, we need to catch up. We are delayed in terms of where their developmental milestones are. So is it something that we can, work on to catch up? And it's not a focus so much on communication as far as from the motor perspective of pointing to letters to spell to communicate in that perspective. I do suggest to parents, like, let's go and do some speech therapy, which is more of from a traditional perspective, because it tends to be more play-based. It tends to be more where the speech therapists are going to really get the motor part at that age. And then for whatever reason, it kind of shifts, but it has to do with presumed competence. So I still, it's all motor, right from the get-go. So I think, moving up, where if I'm getting a referral I'm working with a client who is more like 8, 9, that is then, let's look at alternative forms of communication. Let's work on getting that and working on the motor skills through that, whether it's through, spelling to communicate, or, and I should say in combination, working on their purposeful motor and fitness skills. So I know that currently I have a client who is as young as 4, and we're doing like little obstacle courses that have functional movement in it. So, he'll do little box squats, and he'll do, we get down on the floor and we push our bodies up, like as I quote, push up. And we're doing those kinds of things to get not only that input, but also more purposeful motor skills. So it's not so much focused on, what Ido taught me as far as only on the sensory piece. I'm always putting in that motor and then combining it with some of the sensory input, like when we're pushing up, we're getting that deep pressure, those kinds of activities to help with the regulation and to help with building those connections. And then as far as communication, it is like, once, like, we know, we've talked with our guys where they have the ability to spell, to read when they're incredibly young. And so it's kind of making that decision, but also understanding and thinking about developmentally, their bodies, they're not going to sit, for a long period of time. 4-year-olds don't usually sit for long periods of time. So the sessions look different, but the big focus is on that motor and that purposeful motor. And I remember talking, I think it was at a conference that we had attended, might have been Motomorphosis, I can't remember. And it was with Samuel Kaposi. And he said, and actually I was talking with he and his mom, and they both agreed that the early motor work of purposeful motor when he was like 4 and 5, that's what they focused on. They didn't focus on like super big into communication at that time. And that was just them, but that was something that they swore definitely helped him later on, where he developed the brain body connection and those motor pathways. So it's definitely individual, but certainly early as far as the fitness and purposeful motor, and then also, more of that communication and building it into.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for really going into that. It's helpful to understand because, we think, let's get it all done, as early as possible, but we do have to take into consideration their age, what their bodies can do, and how long they can sit, and all. Yeah, there's so many components.
Yeah. Well, and I was also going to follow up with that too. It's also at that age, a big part of it is educating the parents, because if you can talk with the parents about presuming competence and understanding that brain body disconnects and thinking about it neurologically, that is going to shift everything from that point on, right? Because typically when you're going and seeing and working more traditionally with therapists and or pediatrician, it's what we've talked about, like not presuming competence, not understanding this is a sensory motor difference, nothing to do with cognition. So I think that is the other area that's critical, is to get parents in and understanding right from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ida. I don't know if there's anything else you want to address. I mean, actually, I'm sure we could talk so much more about other things, and we probably will. We'll probably come back and say, remember when you said this, because it's just so full of insight, and really, just like you said, Dana, shifting the parents' perspective. It's a hard thing to do because they've been told and taught, and not a well-known. This is not well known, the motor differences and the sensory differences. And so to shift the mindset of the parents can be really challenging. So you're right, to start young and to really build that into their new framework of thinking is so important.
Okay. Yes, I think we'll come back to Ito's for sure, because it's a lot. But I also want to give the rest of our time, the remaining time, to our second guest, Niko Boskovic. And I'm going to read a little bit of his blog because he regularly writes for a blog. He's from Oregon, and he writes a blog on the Oregon Council on Developmental Disabilities website, OCDD for short. And the website is ocdd.org, and you can find his blogs on there, as well as his Facebook page, which we will put both of those links in the description underneath our video so that you can get the information and go directly and read a lot more about what he posts. So here, and he actually really does talk similarly to what Ito, in terms of bringing up certain aspects that Ito did, but he also has somewhat of a different perspective too. So I'm going to read just a little bit of his blog, and then we can kind of chat a little bit more about that. So Niko says, probably the biggest thing people get wrong about me is that they second guess my humanity all the time and reduce my feelings to being equivalent to Spock, the unemotional Vulcan from Star Trek. In reality, I am so tuned into how people are feeling that I can tell whether or not they are sad or excited, angry under the surface, having a good day, or feel lonely. People as a whole seem to have assigned autistics a lack of emotions and empathy, when in fact we probably pick up too much from our surroundings. My situation might be amplified by my synesthesia, but as a whole, people like me, i.e. non-speakers, or what some parents regrettably call low functioning or classic autism, are inundated by dozens of sensory streams at once. Another big surprise would undoubtedly be my special interests and hobbies. People who meet me when I am using my letterboard walk away with an idea of me as a unique individual with his own interests and sense of humor. They hear what I think about, and they put my humanity up next to their own. This doesn't happen when someone speaks for me or assumes what I like based on their knowledge or interacting with other disabled people. We are all unique in how our disabilities impact us, but our humanity is shared. Unfortunately, if we are unable to communicate on our own, half our worth as people is gone. We have dismissed, overlooked for friendship, and saddled with the role of helpee instead of helper. So again, short,
blurb, but tons of information and tons of things to kind of unpack and think about. But what really, I mean, there's a number of things that spoke to me about what Niko said, but just really, I guess, as a whole, thinking about how the quote stereotype that we've all been told that individuals with autism do not have empathy or theory of mind or any of those kind of deep, high level, quote, high level thinking. Because I mean, I know adults that are neurotypical that that do not have theory of mind. And like, we can go into that, right? Like, I'm just going, wait a minute, what's going on? But more, I guess, more specifically, the deep feeling. And that's something that spoke with me. I was always told that I was a super sensitive kid growing up, you know, and I didn't like what Niko was talking about as far as feeling how other was feeling and understanding, you know, whether they're excited or angry. I would say that I would have a good sense and perception, but not what he's clearly talking about. So I think that that's what spoke to me, because we work with so many individuals that have said that to us, and that they, you know, feel that, and so it can be completely overwhelming when they go into a social situation where there's a lot of people and they're feeling everybody's emotions in that situation. And then, you know, again, it goes back to insides, outsides, like what's happening and what's going on with their body. And they could be like going into that situation looking like they're completely fine, but internally it's something that is just extremely dysregulating. So I think, you know, for Niko, just highlighting some of those stereotypes like Ito did, but some of those stereotypes that we kind of put on autistic individuals, and he even goes, you know, saying low functioning or classic autism, we quickly kind of put them in a box. And then here they are, where that line of him saying that, where is it? We are all unique in our own disabilities and how our disabilities impact us, but our humanity is shared. Mm-hmm. And that I thought was like, mind blown. Like, just think about that.
I know, it was just beautiful. Yeah, I too, as I was reading your words, Niko, I was just, so many of the conversations I've had with other non-speakers, just conversations and just experiences just kept like come flooding into my memory. Like, oh my gosh, this reminds me of when somebody said this, or when he did this, or when she said this, or did this. And in terms of what was on the outside, like, was unclear to me. You know, feeling what other people feel, like what you said, like, I'm, you know, for Niko, it's definitely more enhanced, I think, that when you and I may feel. And I remember, I think it was on episode 1 when Zach shared, he talked about having a really impulsive body in unfamiliar situations. And that was because he was picking up on what others are feeling, or that he was unable to pick up how other people were feeling. And remember, we talked about how, that's so interesting, you know, that made him anxious, unable to understand, because he's in a new environment, things were new. And it just goes to highlight just how much is happening, you know, that we can't see. And, you know, what he talked about, like the unemotional Vulcan from Star Trek, you know, and I think so often, you know, you'll see like autistics in general, and either they seem to have like a lot of emotion or kind of like more of a flat affect. And so we're kind of like, you know, what is going on? And if you don't know, it's like, well, maybe there's nothing really happening. They don't really get the situation. They don't get people or social interaction, or the opposite. And you're like, whoa, you know, they're all over the place. They're bouncing, you know, they're so happy. Look at them laughing so much, or giddy. And it's that under the surface, we don't know. And synesthesia, actually, I'm so glad you brought that up, Niko. I'd like to, you know, today we don't have enough time on our podcast to talk about it today, but I'd love to do an episode in the future about synesthesia. You know, that was something that was brand new to me in the last, I'd say, couple of years, which is when for those of you that may not know, it's when senses overlap. So let's say, for example, like a classic one I kind of get an example of is if I say the word purple, you know, for typical people, they might see the color purple in their mind. But then for somebody with synesthesia, if you say the word purple, they might hear, you know, a B flat sound, or they might feel a sensation in their body, or, you know, there's so many things that could happen. And it's quite fantastic. I've actually listened to some podcasts about it and things, and talked to a lot of clients about it as well. So yeah, it's something we just need to keep exploring, all of these things. But another thing I really loved that you said, Niko, is just about being individual and being unique and having special interests and hobbies, and that no one's really going to know what they are, and even maybe necessarily hold value until you say, you know, until they see you using your letterboard. And then, you know, it's sad, but it's true. I think there's so many people, I know that I'll tell people, you know, what they say, oh, what do you do for a living? You know, what do you do? And I was like, okay, I'm like, get ready. And, you know, like, you know, how much time do you have? And then I, you know, go into the process of trying to explain how I, you know, teach people the motor skills to spell and point to letters as an alternative form of communication. And they look at me like, oh, you know, that's nice. And then they might tell me about their autistic cousin or their, you know, autistic sibling. And, you know, and they try to understand. And, but, you know, you can see the difference between when you're telling somebody about it and then when they see it and they're there and we're in the room. And I mean, the flood of emotions that come from, you know, the bystanders that are watching is typically awesome. You know, they are just overcome because it's something they just never really, they didn't presume competence. They didn't know. And then they, you know, so yeah.
It's awesome. These have all been amazing in terms of our responses. Like, you know, when you and I talked about what is our question going to be, you know, and we got support and help from non-speakers to develop our question. That's what we did. We kind of, you know, had an idea, and then we said, okay, what do you guys want to? And so they were able to come together and help us out with that. But then I don't know about you, but I was not expecting these, like, and I don't really know, to be honest, what I was expecting, but just the responses were phenomenal. And just, they were all, so we could see the similarities between them all, like as far as the brain body disconnect and insides don't match outsides. And, you know, how what's going on the inside, you know, people don't think about that, and they take up what's going on in my uncontrolled body. And then, you know, just that to education, because Ito brought that up. And then and Niko, this is just a snippet of his blog, but when I was able to read through the whole blog, he brings that aspect up too. And that's so important, you know, as far as not only how they're being taught at school and what people think about them, but the quality and high level academics that they're all entitled to, you know, to communication, to purposeful motor skills. Like, it was just, it really, I think, essentially, I think we're going to have to do another discussion about all this stuff, which, again, like we said at the very beginning, that we could take one of these and pull all different types of podcasts out. But I'm so grateful to every single one of our spellers who responded, and we're definitely going to be picking up others and asking for everybody's responses. And I think that, you know, we're going to have to maybe kind of be creative with, okay, so who are we going to ask, and what's our questions going to be? And then, hey, what about having them respond, or doing a Q&A? And my brain just kind of goes, but things like that would be, I think, really, really cool just to kind of build from. So I am thrilled with how this series went in the first 3. So we have episode 1, 2, and 3 now, and we are going to be starting our next kind of podcast and definitely be doing other series where we're going to have multiple podcasts together. But we will, I think if you want to say any final words, Evelyn, about it, but I'm just like blown away, truly blown away.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I'm humbled by everyone's responses and just thrilled to be able to share it with a greater audience. And, Dana and I have a lot of like, oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe. And so here's this opportunity for us to share it really in a grander scale. So thank you to all of the spellers who have contributed to our first 3 episodes. We are eternally grateful. And yeah, going forward, again, we are really excited about, interviewing more spellers, talking with parents, other professionals, researchers, and, we have some cool things planned. So definitely be on the lookout because we've got lots to talk about and we've got a lot for the world to learn.
Perfect. Okay, so we will end it here. And as always, I will put information pertaining to each episode below and details in terms of how you can reach us. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
Bye.